Me and my musical chums dressed up to play a track about the Arthurian legends. Grandiose music, a heroic subject, outlandish costumes. This could only be the 70s, heyday of that much maligned creature, the concept album. I mean, be honest, the dreaded words, the concept album, probably conjure up visions of straggly-haired rockers jabbering on about unicorns, goblins and the end of the world. But back when people actually listened to LPs from start to finish, there was nothing more rewarding. Some of these records tell a story, others explore a mood or a theme, but they all create their own world and draw you in. And some performers, me included, may have got a bit carried away. In the 70s, the bombast and excess of concept albums and the bands that made them grew ripe for parody. And they got it. OK, there may have been some wrong turns along the way, but these records explored the far frontiers of music and gave us some of our best-loved LPs. So join me to explore this strange parallel universe, the weird and sometimes wonderful world of the concept album. Let's venture into the maze. OK, let's meet a concept album.
This is Apollo Control at 102 hours into the flight of Apollo 11.
Not from the 70s, but from 2015. The band is Public Service Broadcasting and the concept is in the title. The Race for Space, a theme that so pervades the album, it's practically a documentary.
Everyone sit down, get prepared for events that are coming.
I find writing conceptual albums to be very liberating. The Race for Space is a very diverse album. It's got kind of electronic stuff on there, it's got funk stuff on there, it's got kind of post-rock stuff on there. And I kind of feel it's the conceptual idea behind it, providing the glue, the sort of the backbone to the album that allows you to take these kind of journeys off into these different styles and genres.
Retro, go. Fido, go. Guidance, go. Control.
I still feel there's a very kind of perceptive and demanding audience for the album format, and I think you can get a lot more out of music and the relationship between tracks by a sort of a correctly sequenced or a well-sequenced set of tracks.
So the concept album didn't stop with the 70s and prog rockers like me, but has kept on going, crossing the decades and the musical boundaries. And it's taken a bewildering variety of forms. So it's worth stopping and asking, what, in essence, is a concept album?
Either it's a narrative or it's descriptive or it has elements, maybe individual songs, but they're still talking on the same subject.
It's like putting together a movie for somebody's ears. You know, you've got to get a story, you've got to find the dynamics, you've got to find the right drama in it.
But it's not always that simple, because some records are hailed as concept albums for other reasons.
There is there's a theme and there's a vibe, or there's this thing. I always say, does it sound like it would be in the same movie?
And sometimes the concept is for the listener to discover.
I make sure that I understand the narrative. I don't necessarily give other people that privilege.
Sometimes the concept escapes onto the cover, or it's the alter ego that artists create for themselves. Sometimes it's so obscure that no one can put their finger on what the concept is. So tracing the story of the concept album is like going through a maze. There are unexpected turns, the occasional dead end, and exits that turn out to be new openings. But some of the things you find on the way are among the most accomplished and exotic creations in the history of rock. And the whole glorious odyssey starts back in 1940s America. can't tell the story of the concept album without the daddy of them all. Before MP3s, CDs, tape cassettes and even vinyl LPs, Woody Guthrie turned his own experiences of the hardships of rural America during the Depression into a folk music classic.
On the 14th day of April of 1935, there struck the worst of dust storms that ever filled the sky.
The concept is straightforward. Guthrie wanted to tell America about suffering on its own doorstep.
And through our mighty nation, it left a dreadful track.
But for Woody, a concept album, he had to be there. He had to be right in the setting. He had to be experiencing what everyone was experiencing. So he was one of those hundreds of thousands of people who sat in dust up to his chest.
I'm a Dust Bowl refugee. I'm a Dust Bowl refugee. And I wonder, will I always be a Dust Bowl refugee?
When Woody started out, an album was exactly that, a bulky collection of 78s, each side lasting only a few minutes, bound up like a photo album. But in 1948, a new development presented artists with a broader canvas to make a bigger statement. Vinyl. For the first time, boffins had found a way to get 40 minutes of music on one disc. The era of the long-playing record had begun.
The vinyl LP was largely invented in order for pieces of classical music to expand in a symphonic form, instead of it being broken up into chunks as it was on old 78s. And all of a sudden, the vinyl 33 1/3 LP allows musicians to stretch out a bit. It allows people to be able to kind of construct albums on longer themes.
And not just themes, but stories.
You make me feel so young. You make me feel so spring has sprung.
Taking classical music as a blueprint, one artist led the way in exploiting the broad canvas of the long player. Frank Sinatra put storytelling at the heart of the concept album with a string of pioneering LPs for Capitol Records in the 1950s.
Each place I go, only the lonely go.
The great step that he took was to say to himself, I won't just sing individual songs that tell stories, but I will group them together so that a group of 12 of them tells a larger story in the same way that a 19th century classical song cycle, like Schubert's Wiener Reise, might tell a story.
It's 2:45. There's no one in the place except you and me.
Only the Lonely was a perfect example of that. It is a story that picks the narrator up in romantic difficulties and leaves him alone in a bar, telling his story to the bartender at 2:45 in the morning.
We're drinking, my friend, to the end of a brief episode.
In terms of setting the mood, you put on that album not to listen to a particular hit. You put it on because it absolutely created this emotion, this feeling, and worked best as an album. And that's kind of the fundamental that you need for concept albums, which is they are their own whole, like a movie or a book. They work best in their entirety.
Just make it one for my baby, and one more for the road.
Sinatra's gift was to sing other people's songs as though the emotions were his own. But with the next decade, things were set to change.
The LP became the canvas for a new breed of artists in the 1960s. Singers and bands who wrote their own songs and invited you into their world. And no subject was off limits.
Wouldn't it be nice if we were older?
Pet Sounds, released in 1966, is the first album on our journey whose concept is the artist's own inner life. Which might seem odd coming from the Beach Boys, known so far for breezy songs about girls, cars and surfing. And it's not just its emotional sincerity that made a splash, if you'll pardon the pun.
The real, true, mind-bending artistry that went into Pet Sounds, the attention to detail, the drive to make something like that is extraordinary.
The artistry sprang from songwriter and resident genius Brian Wilson. He said he wanted the record to express feelings from my soul, and he hired lyricist Tony Asher to help put his emotional life into words.
I think Brian felt like he wanted all the songs to be fresh and original and new and not necessarily what you'd expect from the Beach Boys.
The album is tinged with the heartache of a young man on a journey from innocence to experience. And to achieve what he called this new type of sophisticated feeling music, he turned to the recording studio.
I can hear so much in your sigh.
And herein lies one of those technology-driven turns that altered the course of the concept album. Because the studio was now more than just a place you recorded in. It was an Aladdin's cave of enabling technology, synthesizers, mellotrons, and crucially, the multi-track tape recorder, which allowed musicians to build up layers of sounds and set free the imagination. Pet Sounds achieved only modest sales in the US. Maybe it was just too weird. But in Britain, it was a hit. More importantly, it established the idea of the concept album as a beacon of technological innovation. The Beach Boys had set a high bar. And within a year, the Beatles produced their most experimental record yet. Sgt. Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band. The concept? It's all on Peter Blake's iconic cover. The most famous group in the world are calling themselves something else. It's the idea that a fictitious band is playing the songs that gives the record coherence. This playful use of alter egos inspired others and expanded the notion of what an LP could be. But it was another British band that gave us what may be the concept album in its most ambitious form yet, the rock opera.
He stands like a statue, becomes part of the machine. Feeling all the bumpers, always playing clean. Plays by intuition, the digit counters fall. That deaf, dumb and blind kid sure plays a mean pinball.
Tommy by The Who, released in 1969, tells the story of a deaf, dumb and blind boy and his quest for spiritual fulfillment. It has the scale and ambition of a classical opera.
Touch me.
Tommy is completely different from Sgt. Pepper or Pet Sounds. It's not just thematic, it's linear, it's chronological. It really is a story. And no surprise that in the years to come it turns into a film. Of course it does. It's the ultimate concept album.
With stars like Elton John, Tommy burst into life in Ken Russell's flamboyant movie treatment. In a way, it was surprising this breakthrough album had come from The Who. Back in 1968, they were known mainly for a string of singles. Oh, yeah, and for smashing up their gear at the end of gigs. But The Who's creative driving force, Pete Townshend, had set his sights on higher things.
Pop music is crucial to today's art, and it's crucial that it should remain art, and it is crucial that it should progress as art.
Townshend wrote much of the material during the band's tour of the States in 1968.
And he wouldn't go any partying or anything. He'd have these charts and he'd devise these schemes and plot structures and all on sort of Holiday Inn paper and stuff. And they're so detailed, and his thinking, you know, you think, Christ, you should get out more.
The band's manager, Kit Lambert, was worried he was getting a bit carried away.
Kit Lambert kept saying, look, it's all right you pretending to be Wagner. We need a single. You've got to, you know. And he said, I'm not going to write any singles now. I'm going to concentrate on this.
Tommy was released in May 1969 as a double album. It came with an overture, complete with recurring musical motifs in true classical style. The band booked Ronnie Scott's Jazz Club as the venue to present this new rock opera to a sceptical press.
And when they went in, the press were pretty hostile. Townshend got angry at that. So he turned around and said to John Entwistle and the others words that they loved to hear. He said, right, let's play it very loud. Seriously effing loud, he said. So they turned it up really loud. Went into Tommy, just played the whole thing really fast all the way through. And they got a standing ovation.
Tommy doesn't know what day it is. He doesn't know who Jesus was or what day it is.
Tommy was a forerunner of rock musicals like Jesus Christ Superstar and Godspell. But our next record moves us away from fiction into hard reality and comes from a musical culture where the concept album was quite alien. Detroit, home of Motown, the ultimate hit singles label and the home turf of Marvin Gaye, master of the soulful love ballad. That is, until he started to look at what was going on around him.
They push us around. They arrest us for nothing. They call us niggers. They say we stink. They insult our women. We've had this for years, as long as we can remember. And the point simply came when somebody decided he wouldn't take it anymore.
Marvin Gaye had been shocked when racial tensions in black suburbs boiled over into riots. And the reality of the Vietnam War was brought home to him when his own brother was called up. He said, with the world exploding all around me, how am I supposed to write love songs? The result was the first ever R&B concept album, What's Going On, released in 1971.
Marvin was just compelled by the Vietnam War, the peace movement, the assassination of Martin Luther King. I mean, you know, I think he just really felt prophetically called to make that record.
This is the concept album, A Social Comment. What's Going On is not a question, it's a statement. It so baffled Motown owner Berry Gordy that initially he refused to release it.
It's grounded in the Motown tradition, but it completely expands it. You know, really rewrites the book on what, you know, what R&B is.
I was so glad when Marvin did it, because he did it real R&B, church sounding, politically, socially, you know, commentary in the song. But he still did it with that Marvin Gaye smoothness of sexual healing, even though he's talking about what's going on. It still sounds like a love song.
Oh, make me wanna holler the way they do my life. Yeah. Make me wanna holler the way they do my life.
What's going on is so anchored in reality, it's practically a news bulletin. But elsewhere, artists were moving in a different direction. The 70s was the decade when the concept album entered the space age, and no one did it better than David Bowie. He created a brilliant pop fantasy, a futuristic fable that charted the rise and fall of the androgynous rock superstar Ziggy Stardust.
There's a starman waiting in the sky. He'd like to come and meet us, but he thinks he'd blow our minds. There's a star.
Released in 1972, the album is about an alien who brings humanity a message of hope 5 years before the end of the world. But the story is less important than the alter ego Bowie created.
The concept album has moved on so much now. We're getting concept artists. We're getting rock singers that aren't just saying, here is my wonderful work. They're saying, I am my wonderful work. You know, the name is not his own name. The hair, the face, the visuals are not his own.
Had to phone someone, so I picked on you.
Unlike Sgt. Pepper, Ziggy didn't just exist on the album cover. And once in character, Bowie was free to explore, well, just about anything.
Here you had a different kind of pop record that melded glam rock and pop and intellectual thinking in a way that the Beatles didn't. It was thinking about the apocalypse, the end of times, sci-fi, all these different subjects in one place, and did it in a record that completely captivated so many people in a very direct way.
Starman waiting in the sky. He'd like to come and meet us, but he thinks he'd blow our minds.
Also in the early 70s, you've got a further refinement in the idea of the concept album with artists like Pink Floyd. And what they do is bring out an album like The Dark Side of the Moon, where all the tracks seep into each other like blood through a bandage.
Floyd's 1973 release was serious stuff, a sombre meditation on life and death. Yet it became the biggest selling concept album ever.
Something like that was obviously so of its time, this kind of like mind-expanding time. But still, you know, I still picked it up when I was a teenager and I still listen to it regularly.
I mean, it's a phenomenal record, you know. I mean, all the uncanny, weird things that they do, yet it's so musical, it's so expressive, it's so perfect, you know. I think they would probably say that too. The people that made it probably stood there and said, man, that's cool.
Dark Side of the Moon is about really adult, strange themes. It's about death, it's about life, it's about contemplating mortality.
It becomes immersive. It reflects the fact that we now have stereos, the fact that we're now rolling joints on gatefold album sleeves, the fact that we're now completely immersed in this total experience.
Breathe in the air. Don't be afraid to care.
For fans, a key part of that total experience was the album cover, created by one of the most cutting-edge design teams around. Hypnosis was run by Aubrey Powell and Storm Thorgerson. Up to then, they'd specialised in producing surreal photographic designs for Pink Floyd and other leading bands.
Rick Wright, the keyboard player, said to us, you know what, I'm a bit fed up with your sort of weird photo designs. Why don't you try and do something which is a little bit more like a Black Magic chocolate box? And we were, what? We don't do that. So we were looking through a French photographic book from the 50s, and there was an early colour photograph in there of a prism sitting on a sheet of white music with light coming in through a window, and it created this rainbow effect. And Storm turned around to me and said, I've got it. And somehow that image resonated with people and has become the symbol of Pink Floyd.
Run.
You know, opens up nice and soft, takes you in, runs you up, you know, then you move into the wonderful soul-like wailing section at the end. And then that's the end of side one, and the stylist is going tit, tit, tit. Then you've got to get up off your seat, right, or up off your beanbag, right, turn the album over, and when money hits, you're basically going back to sit down again, and it's like, you know, do, 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 do.
Get away. You get a good job with more pain, you're okay.
And then it goes back into the curve again, and then leaves you with that wonderful, you know, with that wonderful huge ending.
And now we come to two key points in our tale. First, it's the early 70s, the era when the concept album was for a time practically joined in marriage to the genre we know as progressive rock. And second, it's where I come into the story.
Cold summer, listening.
In 1971, I joined what was perhaps the last word in prog rock bands. Yes.
Here is the ultimate in pretentious rock. That's what Yes's great appeal was. No, we're not Slade, and we're not going to wear funny glasses like Elton John. This is a group of classically trained musicians who are trying to meld the best of classical music with the best of rock music and poetry and tripped out mystique and Krishna and everything on top.
I was with them for some of their best-known records, not least the infamous 1973 double album, Tales from Topographic Oceans. Everyone agrees it's a concept album, but no one can quite put their finger on what the concept is.
I've got no idea. I find that a really strange album. I like it divided. It split a lot of Yes fans. I mean, side one and side two I love. Side three and side four rarely gets on the turntable. Oh.
As for singer John Anderson's lyrics, even he didn't claim to know what they meant.
I think I work a bit backward because I write a tune and then I write the lyrics, not so much for the idea behind the lyrics, but for the sound of the words.
And even if you haven't heard the music, you've probably seen the album covers. The person tasked with creating art for the most obscure lyrics ever was Roger Dean. Fortunately, he'd already illustrated previous Yes albums and had evolved a bold strategy to come up with a concept of his own and apply it across a series of records.
I was thinking in terms of creating a world where the music may have come from. So it was the music, the world, and a culture. And I had this idea of a story that could take place in that culture that wove in and out of albums. This is the first one I did for Yes. This is Fragile. And the story is about a little boy who dreams that his world is going to break up. And he has to galvanize his parents and friends to build a space ark and take all the bits of the world to find a new home. The story idea, though, was followed through on their live album. This is Yes Song, so there's the space ark taking the segments of the planet to a new world. colonizing the planet. There's cities being built, pathways, bridges. So we come to Tales from Topographic Oceans, perhaps the most controversial of the Yes albums. The music immensely complicated. There was never an attempt to illustrate the music, but fortunately, a lot of people think it worked very well. There was a great correlation between the music and the imagery.
But for me, some of Yes's grandiose ideas were spiralling out of control. It's pretty well known that my least favourite LP of Yes is Tales from Topographic Oceans. Truth of the matter is, we had too much material for a single LP and not enough for a double LP. In fact, I'm not even sure I know what it was all about. Something to do with the vision of a Hindu yogi and the Shastric scriptures, I think. There's great bedtime reading for you.
My words but a whisper, you definitely say shout. As the last wave uncovers.
And I wasn't the only musician starting to have doubts about the marriage of the concept album and prog rock. In particular, Ian Anderson, frontman of Jethro Tull, had produced a spoof concept album. It had a title you might call anti-pretentious.
To be thick as a brick.
Where Thick as a Brick came from was really a bit of a naughty dig, and I was having a little bit of fun with it because it was easy to poke fun at people who were actually better musicians than we were, but, you know, had grandiose ideas, sometimes perhaps a little bit, you know, dare we say, above their station. And to make it even more absurd, I thought, well, we'll put this in the words of an 8-year-old precocious schoolboy.
Could this be a dig at certain writers of precocious lyrics? Who knows? But certainly taking the mickey is what the cover is all about.
I thought we'll go for broke here, and the idea of presenting it all as a newspaper featuring spoof stories. And so yeah, we had to find all the material to come up with a spoof, very parochial, rather silly English newspaper.
With headlines such as "Non-Rabbit Missing." The album, cover and all, went down very well with the public, and therein lies an irony.
When you set out to poke fun at the concept album, and then, of course, it then becomes #1 in the Billboard charts, whatever, then you've joined the club almost, and suddenly Jethro Tull became very much the prog rock band.
Well, it seems that's just the way it was in the early 70s. Audiences wanted it big, loud and conceptual. So, when I left Yes, I did a few concept albums of my own, but ones where you could actually understand what the concept was. I'd already dipped my toe in the water with my 1973 album, The Six Wives of Henry VIII, surreal character studies in music. The critics slaughtered it, but it flew up the charts and sold millions of records, which just goes to show that when it comes to concept albums, you can never underestimate the good taste of the record-buying public. So I followed that up with another one, this time based on Jules Verne's Journey to the Centre of the Earth.
They advanced with difficulty over granite fragments mingled with flint, quartz and alluvial deposits, eventually reaching a plain covered with bones like a huge cemetery.
Journey to the Centre of the Earth was a grandiose affair with the London Symphony Orchestra, the English Chamber Choir and David Hemmings as narrator, premiered with 2 sell-out shows at the Royal Festival Hall.
Exploring the forest, they discovered a herd of gigantic animals, mastodons, which were being marshalled by a primitive human being.
20,000 people came to see the live show at Crystal Palace, complete with 2 giant inflatable dinosaurs.
Unfortunately, one of them sprung a leak during the show and let off giant farts throughout the entire performance. Or was that my bass player? But despite the flatulent dinosaurs, it was clear there was a public appetite for concept albums turned into spectacle. So when it came to staging my next album, The Myths and Legends of King Arthur, I decided to think big. Castles, horses, knights, the old maiden, medieval costumes. Impossible, they said. Holiday on Ice are in just before you, so it'll be an ice rink. Not a problem, I said. I'll do it on ice.
I actually went to see this on ice at, I think it was the Empire Pool, Wembley. I truly didn't know what I was seeing, and I mean that not in a good way. You've got guys with the pantomime horses skating around while Rick is, you know. A concept too far, in my view. Definitely a concept too far.
Thanks, Mick. I love you too. But in terms of taking concept stage shows to the edge, I wasn't the front runner. That distinction probably has to go to Peter Gabriel of Genesis. He'd already made his mark with the bizarre personas he'd adopted to put over the darkly serious intent of albums like Foxtrot and Selling England by the Pound. But the ultimate was the stage show spawned by this album.
And the Lamb lies down.
The Lamb Lies Down on Broadway, released in 1974, had a darker theme than anything Genesis had done before, and quite unexpected.
The album is a concept album, but it rests on the concept of, in a sense, a Puerto Rican street punk in New York, which is a rather unusual concept, perhaps, for a bunch of public schoolboys from, England to fall upon.
The wind is blowing harder now, blowing dust into my eyes. The dust settles on my skin, making a crust I cannot move.
You can see why it lent itself to the stage. It's a kind of Pilgrim's Progress through the streets of Manhattan, but populated with demons and strange visions. The cover was by the graphic art team Hypnosis, famous for their work with Pink Floyd. In their archives is a folder of documents that shed light on the birth of the concept.
Okay, so this is an original folder, which probably hasn't been opened in about 40 years. Raoul with oversized ravens, his gentles. There's all sorts of things, funny things here. We've got the Genesis logo that we designed for Lamb Lies Down on Broadway. You've got things like, this is interesting, this is a letter that Peter Gabriel wrote to Storm, my partner in Hypnosis, outlining exactly what Lamb Lies Down on Broadway was about. So there's a whole explanation here so that we could try and work up the imagery that would go with the album. I mean, that's what I call a real concept album. And look here, at the end of it, you've got alternative endings. He hadn't decided, Peter Gabriel, at the time, which ending he wanted, so he gave an option of both of them.
I wandered lonely as a cloud till I came upon this dirty street. I've never seen a stranger crowd.
The great thing about Genesis is that they had their cake and ate it, every last crumb. The music on The Lamb Lies Down on Broadway was easily the best they ever made with Peter Gabriel. And the show was fantastic.
Your skin's all covered in slimy lumps with lips that slide across.
Gabriel, at one point, comes out in this, like an elephant man kind of costume.
We love you, have tasted love. Don't be alarmed at what you see. You yourself are just the same as what you see.
And the pictures look absurd, because it was wonderfully absurd. But if you were at that concert, It was no different from seeing a fantastic Broadway show or West End show, but for a new, more switched-on generation.
The concept as total theatre was now a hot ticket, and one American artist put his own twist on the spectacular live show. In a galaxy far away, George Clinton and his Parliament Funkadelic Collective were conjuring up a funk universe every bit as creative as prog rock. The concept? Black people in space.
We have returned to claim the pyramids. We are partying on the mothership. I am the mothership connection.
Haven't seen Pink Floyd, Sgt. Pepper. Those was like rock operas. I said, let me do a funk opera.
Yeah. Are you ready?
If you went to see the band, they had their own mothership that came down, and Dr. Frankenstein came out.
And at that point, you had only seen on Star Trek, the girl was the only black person you saw in outer space that you identified with being in outer space.
Do not attempt to adjust your radio. There's nothing wrong. We have taken control as to bring you this special show.
It just said that a genre where one normally didn't even see black people. He was like claiming that as a place where black people were not going to be erased. We were not going to be absent. We were not going to be made invisible.
We want the bone. Come on. Get up off your ass now. It's that time now. Gotta have some fun.
So while on the surface the concept is space funk, this is really about black empowerment and aspiration.
George is really important in terms of figuring out that you can be as impactful but speaking in code. You know what I mean? So it's all there, but it's there to be deciphered. You know what I mean?
You can explore any kind of concept, go places where no man has ever gone before. You know, you never know what's going to happen when you got a spaceship.
We now come to a rather distressing part of the story, because in the late 70s, we prog rockers suddenly found the heathen were at our gates. Along came punk and burst our bubble, and prog rock became the pawn of the music industry. Records that you smuggled out of shops in brown paper bags.
And I always remember John Lydon walking down the corridor towards me wearing a t-shirt that said, "I hate Pink Floyd." The next thing I knew was that Jamie Reed, the designer, had designed an album cover with torn up bits of newspaper against a pink background, and I knew the game was up.
Well, punk certainly knocked us off our perch, but news of our demise had been somewhat exaggerated. And as though to prove the point, in 1979, this comes along. The Wall was one of Pink Floyd's best-selling albums. A double, if you please.
And Roger Waters, who came up with the whole idea, wrote most of the songs. He's got choirs, he's got strings. He's making something cinematic. He's making something for the ages. Truly, it's like punk never happened. And yet at the same time, it's got this fantastic edge, this pulse.
A dark edge perfectly captured in Alan Parker's 1982 film.
I thought The Wall was genius. You know, I loved the aggression in The Wall, I loved the anger, and I related to that.
Do it again. All in all, you're just another brick in the wall.
The Wall had a second wind on a new medium.
Do you know what the best part of MTV is?
But it was a false friend.
MTV comes along at the start of the 80s, and that, far more than punk, sounded the death knell, really, for many of the great progressive rock groups.
It was less a time for records with a narrative that began at the beginning and ended at the end of side 2 and had a story to tell.
Suddenly, we're not about releasing concept albums, we're releasing concept videos. You know, Michael Jackson with the Thriller video was a landmark moment.
For a time, it seemed prog rock and the concept album were dead. But that didn't stop people kicking the corpse.
We have Spinal Tap from the UK!
The movie This Is Spinal Tap took a well-aimed swipe at the world of 70s prog rock with its grandiose concepts and elaborate stagings.
And of course, we all like to think, that's us, they got that from us because they picked up on something that could only have been us.
And I think whoever wrote this scene had seen the extravagant props we had at Yes gigs.
At one show, we'd put Alan White, our drummer, into a giant seashell pod in the middle of the stage. Unfortunately, the gearing mechanism failed and he was left in there gasping for air. He couldn't get out. It was pure Spinal Tap. The crew eventually broke into it to let him out, and he came out clawing the air. He was in a terrible state. It was very dangerous. No, it was very funny. And that could have been a dead end. The concept album going down with prog rock. Outdated and irrelevant. But not quite. Coming out of the punk era, we get Misplaced Childhood by Marillion, a concept album on the theme of lost love that became a bestseller in 1985.
Do you remember the cherry blossom in the market square? Do you remember? I thought it was confetti in our hair.
I find it easier to write like that. I mean, writing 12 songs about all different subject matters, and I find that difficult. But you know, when my mind's locked into a theme, it puts me in a run where I know the direction that I'm going in.
But as the 80s gave way to the 90s, this began to seem less the glimmering of the future than an afterglow of the past.
By the time you get to the 90s, you know, no self-respecting artist that wants to be on the cover of the NME is going to admit in a million years that their new album is a concept album or anything so shameful or old-fashioned.
A ballad behind bars, or you could say real rock from the rock.
Fortunately for the concept album, some artists didn't care if they were on the cover of the NME.
I got a letter from the government the other day. I opened and read it. It said they were suckers.
Especially when they've been banned by radio stations across America.
Damn, I said never.
It Takes a Nation of Millions to Hold Us Back by Public Enemy was a landmark record with an unmistakable concept. Black politics.
Occurred to me, the suckers had authority.
We believe that we're first world people. The Western world cannot throw us down the tubes, so to speak, just because they feel that, you know, we're inferior. That's a bunch of crap.
A rebel in his own mind, supporter of my rhyme, designed to scatter a line of suckers who claim I do crime.
Public Enemy led the way in rap music's embrace of the concept album through the 80s and 90s. They saw the record as a hip-hop version of Marvin Gaye's What's Going On, with attitude to spare.
Come on, y'all, you too.
It's like an audio version of a Black Panther rally, whether it's the impact of the crack plague or mass incarceration. All these hot button topics that just spoke to the possibility of people making blows against the state.
Tables turn, suckers burn to learn. They can't disable the power of my label. Def Jam, judge who I am. The enemy's public. They really give a damn. Strong Island, where I got a wallet.
The concept album found a new energy in hip-hop. In rock, its star had faded. But now and again, you'd get the odd blazing comet. Oklahoma City, USA. This is the Womb Gallery. Yes, that's right. Home of the category-defying band The Flaming Lips, who in 2002 released Yoshimi Battles the Pink Robots. They found they'd made a concept album almost by accident.
We had been a sort of punk rock, drug rock, loud, noisy rock and roll, rock, punk rock group for a long time.
Yoshimi was a Japanese musician the band and producer Dave Fridman happened to be doing some session work with.
And everything that we put in front of her, she would do something on. I'm like, oh, there you go, you know. When we made a track of all this crazy screaming and stuff, Dave said after we had made the track, it sounds like she's either having sex with a robot or being killed by a giant robot. In my mind, I was like, yeah, it is. That's Yoshimi. She's being killed by a giant pink robot. And I think we all kind of looked at each other like, hey, why don't we just say it's that?
Which brings the story of the concept album to the 21st century. And the internet has brought us a new music medium, the MP3 download.
And you've got this ability to put onto an iPod or put onto your phone whatever tracks you like and whatever order you want. And that's kind of lethal in a way for the traditional production and sale of the album.
All the music ever made is now just a click away. You can pick and mix it any way you like. So maybe it's no surprise that serious artists who feel they've got something to say are still making albums with a beginning, middle and an end. Lady Gaga has been drawn to the concept album from the off.
These days, people want to stand out. It's very easy to get lost in the mire of the internet. So to make a grand statement is something that's quite powerful.
Her 2008 debut album, The Fame, explores celebrity and pop culture, while the follow-up, The Fame Monster, confronts the darker side of living in the media spotlight. In 2010, Kanye West produced My Beautiful Dark Twisted Fantasy, an album themed around extravagance, excess and consumer culture. And Kendrick Lamar's 2015 concept album, To Pimp a Butterfly, picks up the baton from rap's pioneers. It explores the personal and political cost of racial inequality.
When our pride was low, looking at the world like, where do we go? And we hate po-po, when they kill us dead in the street for sure. I'm at the preacher's door, my knees getting weak and my gun might blow, but we gon' be alright.
The song All Right became the anthem of the Black Lives Matter movement, the campaign to end police brutality towards unarmed black citizens.
To Pimp a Butterfly completely blew me away. It proves that you can still make records of that quality and of that much integrity, because the musicianship and the lyricism and the structure of the record and everything about it was brilliant, like high art.
So far, singer-songwriter Laura Marlin has made nothing but concept albums, including the acclaimed 2013 LP, Once I Was an Eagle.
I am a master hunter. I cured my skin, now nothing gets in.
Through my own life circumstances, I think there was probably a bit of heartbreak and a bit of confusion about where I was going with my life. I began drawing this character, Rosie, and her bird, her kind of spirit animal.
I don't stare at water anymore. Water doesn't do what it did before.
She goes on this journey and there's lots of archetypal imagery, there's lots of water and there's lots of weather and there's lots of creatures.
When we were in love, if we were, when we were in love, I was an eagle.
The album is a 16-track story arc in which the central figure angrily rejects love and naivety and then rediscovers them at the end.
I'm a fan of the form of an album, and I take great care in structuring a record from start to finish. It gives me an internal structure. Once I've kind of been in that tripped out state and whatever's risen from the unconscious has risen up, and I manage to catch it and then take some control over it. Only I know what it's going to be, and then when it's done, other people can know.
And judging by Laura's chart success, other people are very happy to enter into her world. So it seems the concept album is in rude health. My tour is almost done. There's just one last stop to make, and it's very gratifying for an old prog rocker like me.
I'm pleased to report that the progressive rock concept album has made a comeback too, not least thanks to one of my great mates from the 1970s. In 2014, Jethro Tull frontman Ian Anderson released Homo Eroticus.
It made the top 20 in the UK album charts. Not bad for a record whose theme extends from the dawn of civilization and into an uncertain future.
New blood, old veins, kids can't wait to be gone.
Well, Homo eroticus was about one very simple thing, the migration of the human race. 60, 70, 80,000 years ago, when Homo sapiens went out of Africa, that was very largely driven by climate change and the need, just as is today, as we're saying, of people to find somewhere to go in order to survive.
Which epic thought brings me to the end of my tour, and to the question, does the concept album have a future? For me, the answer is a resounding yes. First, because we'll never lose our age-old love of a well-told tale, and second, because serious artists will always be drawn to big themes. And in a world of bewildering choice, the artists who stand out will be the ones who communicate the best stories and the boldest ideas. That's the big lesson I take from the great concept albums of the past.
I'm sure that the best of these records really will last. Some of them are up there with the finest work that art can offer, and there'll always be a very special place in my heart for the sheer joy of the concept album.
After an attack is over and the all clear has been sounded, arrangements will be made as soon as possible to treat any people who are ill or injured. Listen to your radio. Details will be given about what to do, when to do it, and how. If anyone dies while you are kept in your fallout room, move the body to another room in the house. Label the body with name and address, and cover it as tightly as possible in polythene, paper, sheets, or blankets. Tie a second card to the covering. The radio will advise you what to do about taking the body away for burial. If, however, you have had a body in the house for more than 5 days, and if it is safe to go outside, then you should bury the body for the time being in a trench or cover it with earth and mark the spot of the burial.